Welcome back, everybody, to the Deep Dive. We've got a really interesting one today. This time we're taking a request from Climate Action Skills, an online climate academy all the way from Pakistan.
Oh, cool.
They're doing a deep dive into Greta Thunberg's The Climate Book, and they specifically asked us to take a look at The Deep History of Carbon Dioxide, an essay by Peter Brannan.
Okay.
And I got to say, when I first saw the title, I thought, oh, this is going to be a tough one. But you know what? This essay, it's a total trip through Earth's history. And it really makes you think differently about how CO2, that thing we usually think of as like pollution is actually the foundation of all life. Like, what?
It's wild, right? Brandon really grabs you right off the bat with this line, all life is conjured from CO2.
Yeah, that's a pretty powerful statement.
It sounds kind of like a magic trick, but it's actually like straight up science, you know?
Okay, so how does it get from a simple gas like CO2 to, well, everything?
Photosynthesis, remember that from school? Like
Yep.
plants use sunlight to make food. Okay, so they're taking in CO2, right, and water, and through a bunch of chemical reactions, they make sugars for growth, and they release oxygen as like a byproduct.
Right. Okay.
So basically, all the incredible different kinds of life we see around us, from like the tiniest bacteria to those giant redwood trees, it all comes back to CO2 as its building block.
So all the oxygen in the air, that comes from all this, right? So here's a thought. If plants have been pumping out oxygen for like billions of years, why isn't the atmosphere completely overloaded with oxygen?
That's a good question, and that brings us to something super important. Most of that oxygen, it's actually used up by life itself.
No.
Animals need it to breathe. Bacteria use it to break down stuff. The air we breathe today, that precious 21% oxygen, only exists because a teeny tiny fraction of carbon from ancient life got trapped in rocks over millions and millions of years. And you know what we call those carbon-rich rocks?
What?
Fossil fuels.
Whoa. So the air we breathe, it's like a legacy of ancient life storing away all this carbon. It's like they made a deposit in this giant carbon bank and we're like withdrawing it all super fast now.
Exactly. That's a great way to think about it. And that kind of shows the double-edged sword of CO2, right? It's the foundation of life, but it's also a powerful force in shaping the Earth's climate and how the oceans work, their chemistry and all that. There's this delicate balance, a constant cycle of CO2 going in and out.
Right, the carbon cycle. Volcanoes erupt and release CO2. Life uses and releases it. And the planet has ways of cleaning it out of the atmosphere. I have a feeling things haven't always been so balanced, though, have they?
You got that right. Earth's history is full of like crazy upheavals, and sometimes that finely tuned carbon cycle gets totally messed up. One of the scariest examples, and something I'm sure Climate Action Skills will find interesting, is the Permian extinction.
The Permian extinction. Okay.
Yeah. About 252 million years ago, huge volcanic eruptions, and they went on for thousands of years, spewed out tons of CO2 into the atmosphere. It was like a runaway train, just totally overloading the system.
Okay, I know mass extinctions are, well, bad, but like, paint me a picture. What happened during the Permian extinction?
Right.
What happened when the carbon cycle got all messed up?
Okay, so imagine a world where the temperature just skyrockets, like 10 degrees Celsius, hot, right?
Yeah, that's a lot.
And the oceans are soaking up all that extra CO2, so they become super acidic, basically like a death trap for most marine life.
Yikes.
Oh, and there's more. They're also running out of oxygen. They're choked with toxic gases. And get this, they're covered in this thick layer of slime. Like, ew.
That is nasty.
And as if all that wasn't bad enough, picture these crazy, intense hurricanes just ripping across the planet. It was like the apocalypse, you know?
That sounds absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. About 90% of all life on Earth gone. Just wiped out during the Permian extinction.
90%, wow.
And it took 10 million years for the planet to recover.
And 10 million years, it's hard to even imagine that. But so how does this ancient event, how does that connect to what we're dealing with today? I mean, we don't have volcanoes erupting like that now, right?
No, not like that. But here's the thing. When you look at Earth's history, you see this pattern. Like, every mass extinction that scientists have looked at, they all have one thing in common.
Okay.
They're all linked to disruptions in the carbon cycle. And the scary part is, by burning all these fossil fuels, we're basically doing the same thing those volcanoes did, only way faster.
Oh, wow.
We're releasing all that old carbon back into the atmosphere, but like 10 times faster than during those past extinction events.
It's kind of freaky to think that we're doing what those volcanoes did, right? But are we really headed for another mass extinction? Is the Earth really as vulnerable now as it was back then?
That's the big question, right? It's like the million-dollar question. Life is incredibly resilient, we know that. Over billions of years, it's come back from some pretty crazy stuff. But the speed at which we're changing the climate, it's unlike anything that's ever happened before.
So we're in uncharted territory then.
Yeah, pretty much. So we really need to be careful. We have a responsibility to the people who come after us to try to minimize the risk, right?
Yep, for sure.
The Permian extinction was horrible, but it eventually led to, like, new life forms evolving. That's
Yeah.
how we got the dinosaurs. But that recovery took millions of years, remember?
Right.
Do we really want to gamble with the future of humanity and all the other species on the planet like that?
I mean, no,
Yeah.
definitely not. But I'm kind of holding on to this hope that maybe, just maybe, the Earth is tougher now than it was back then. Life has bounced back from some crazy stuff.
True. It's possible that over all this time, the planet has figured out new ways to keep the carbon cycle in check. But the thing is, the speed at which we're pumping out all this CO2, it's something the Earth has never seen before. It's like we're running this giant experiment, but with no control over it.
And we're the guinea pigs, right? Along with everything else on Earth.
Yeah, I know, it's kind of a scary thought. But Brandon does say we don't have to repeat history, so what can we actually do to make sure we don't end up as just another cautionary tale in Earth's history?
Yeah, that's the big question. What can we do?
Well, this is where groups like Climate Action Skills come in. Their work is so important. Educating people about these issues is the first step towards, like, real change. The solutions, I'm not going to lie, they're complex.
Yeah.
But basically, they come down to two things. We got to reduce our carbon emissions, and we got to help the planet do what it does naturally, absorb and store carbon.
Okay, I get the first part. Reducing emissions. Like switching from fossil fuels to things like solar and wind power, right?
Exactly.
But what about that second part? What do you mean by enhancing, what was it, carbon sinks?
It means we need to protect and restore things like forests, wetlands, those kinds of ecosystems that naturally soak up and store carbon. They're like giant sponges for CO2.
Oh, I see.
We also need to look into new technologies that can capture carbon and store it safely. It's like pulling CO2 right out of the air and locking it away.
So it's like a two-pronged approach.
Yeah.
We got to cut back on what we're putting in and help the planet clean up what's already there.
Yeah.
But that sounds like a huge task.
It is. It's a huge task. But I really believe it's not impossible. We've got the science, we've got the technology, and we have the solutions. What we need now is the will to do it. We need people to work together to make it happen.
And that's where organizations like Climate Action Skills come in.
Right.
They're working on the ground to raise awareness and help people make a difference.
Exactly. They're the ones who are really making a difference day in and day out.
But we've all seen how hard it is to get everyone on board with climate action. There are powerful people who benefit from the way things are now, and there's a lot of misinformation and denial out there. How do we get past all of that? How do we create the kind of change we need?
That's the challenge, right? I mean, that's the challenge of our time. And I think it all goes back to education and awareness. The more people understand how urgent this is, how our actions are all connected, and what could happen if we do nothing, the more likely we are to see real change in policies and in how we all live our lives.
It's a race against time, but it's not hopeless.
Right. We have the knowledge, we have the tools, and hopefully we have the wisdom to, like, avoid a total disaster.
This has been really eye-opening. I've got a whole new perspective on the climate crisis now. It's a little scary, I'm not going to lie, but I also feel like we got to do something, like right now. We can't just sit around and wait.
I agree. We can't be complacent.
Brandon says in his essay, we don't have to repeat history. So what choices can we make to make sure we don't become another one of those, worst events ever in Earth's history?
Well, I think the big takeaway for Climate Action Skills is this idea of perspective. Brandon's essay, it makes you zoom out, like you can see the whole of Earth's history and you see where our current climate crisis fits in.
Yeah, I get that.
It's a story about how everything's connected, these delicate balances, and how powerful the carbon cycle is. It can create life, but it can also destroy it.
It's easy to feel kind of overwhelmed by climate change,
Yeah.
All the headlines every day. It's like, what can I do? It's just a drop in the bucket.
I know what you mean.
But I was reading Brandon's essay, and there was this one line that really stuck with me. He says, there is no reason we need to etch our names on this ignominious roster of the worst events ever in Earth history. That was powerful. Like, we actually have a choice in how this all plays out.
That's exactly what makes Brannon's essay so important, I think. He doesn't sugarcoat it, you know? He lays out what happened in the past, how a messed up carbon cycle almost destroyed the planet. But he also says we don't have to repeat those mistakes.
Right.
We have the knowledge, the technology, and I think most importantly, we're aware of it now. We know what's going on.
That's where I find some hope, you know?
Yeah.
We're the first species
Mm,
that we know of that can actually understand how our actions affect the whole planet.
it's true.
We can learn from what happened before, we can see the risks, and we can actually do something about it.
Exactly. That's what makes this different from those other extinction events. We're not just going blindly into disaster. We can change course. We can adapt. The question is, will we?
Climate action skills, that's the question for all of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a call to action, a plea to use our brains and our ingenuity to avoid disaster. It's a huge responsibility.
You said it.
We're not just stewards of our own fate, we're stewards of the whole planet and all the life on it.
It's humbling, isn't it?
It is. It really makes you think about the choices we make. We need to think long term, not just about what's convenient right now. We have to put the health of the planet first.
You're right. It's not going to be easy, but I think it's possible. We've seen throughout history that when humans are faced with a big threat, they can come together and do amazing things.
Like we put a man on the moon.
Exactly. The climate crisis is no different. We can overcome this, but it's going to take a change in our values and what we think is important.
And it all starts with awareness, right?
Mhm.
Which is why organizations like Climate Action Skills are so important.
Couldn't agree more. The more people understand the situation, how urgent it is, how everything's connected, and what'll happen if we do nothing, the more likely we are to see real change, both in how we live and in global policies.
Well, that's what these deep dives are all about, right? Starting conversations, helping people connect the dots. We got to keep learning, keep sharing, and keep fighting for a better future.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. The more we understand about how the Earth works, the better choices we can make to protect our future.
Climate Action Skills, thank you so much for requesting this deep dive. It's been a really interesting journey through the history of carbon dioxide. Hopefully we've given you some new things to think about and maybe a little more hope that we can actually change things.
It was great to be here.
And remember, even small actions can make a difference. If we all work together, we can create a better, more sustainable future.
For everyone and for the generations to come.
That's it for the deep dive. Thanks for listening. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep pushing for a better world.